5 in the morning has always been my time with God. The house sleeps around me, even the floorboards seem to hold their breath, and there's something sacred about that darkness before dawn. I sit at this same kitchen table where Harold ate his eggs for 37 years, where we planned Christmas mornings and worried over bills, where I got the phone call that changed everything 6 months ago. The coffee's gone cold in my cup, but I don't mind. My hands shake a little as I smooth out this piece of paper, yellow at the edges like everything else in this house. Most folks my age, they call their children when trouble comes knocking. But my children live states away, busy with their own storms, and some conversations are too heavy for long-distance lines. Some things you can only say to God. The pen feels heavy in my fingers, like it knows the weight of what I'm about to write. Outside, the Nebraska wind whispers through the wheat fields, the same sound that's lulled me to sleep and woken me up for decades. But today, that wind carries something different. Today, I'm about to write a letter that will never see a mailbox, never need a stamp. A letter meant for heaven itself. My name is Dorothy Mae Patterson, though most folks around Cedar Falls just call me Dot. I'm 81 years old, and if you're counting, that makes this story set back in 1974, when the world seemed both bigger and smaller than it does now. Bigger because a phone call to California cost more than groceries for a week, smaller because everyone in our county of 3,000 souls knew everyone else's business before Sunday service. Harold and I bought this farm in 1948, right after we married, when corn was king and the future stretched out like those endless Nebraska horizons. We raised 3 children here: Michael, who's now a lawyer in San Francisco, Sarah, who teaches school in Denver, and little Tommy, who's not little anymore and sells insurance in Chicago. They're good children, don't get me wrong. They call when they remember, send cards on holidays, and Michael even flies out twice a year, though his visits feel more like inspections than homecomings. But children grow up and grow away, that's the natural order of things, even if it leaves a mother's heart feeling like an empty barn echoing with memories of what used to be. Harold passed last October, sudden as a summer storm. One moment he was complaining about the coffee being too weak, the next he was gone, right there at this very table, slumped over the morning paper like he'd just gotten tired of reading bad news. The doctor said it was his heart, but I knew better. Harold died of a broken spirit, watching family farms get swallowed up by big corporations, seeing neighbors we'd known for decades pack up and move to town because they couldn't make ends meet anymore. The funeral was small, just a handful of neighbors and the children flying in for 2 days before flying back to their important lives. Now it's just me and 800 acres that feel more like 8,000 on quiet evenings. The nearest neighbor is old Pete Kowalski, 3 miles down the dirt road, and he's dealing with his own troubles since his wife Ruth took sick last spring. Mrs. Henderson at the post office waves when I drive to town for supplies, but conversations there don't go much deeper than weather and wheat prices. Sunday mornings find me in the 3rd pew at Cedar Falls Methodist, same spot Harold and I shared for 26 years, except now there's just me and the empty space where his shoulder used to be. Pastor Williams means well when he talks about God's plan and finding comfort in his embrace, but some comfort you can't find in a sanctuary filled with other people's families. This house holds 46 years of memories in every creaking board and faded wallpaper pattern. The kitchen where I'm sitting still smells like Harold's pipe tobacco and my apple pies, even though I haven't baked in months and his pipes sit cold in the den. The living room still has his reading chair positioned just right to catch the afternoon light, his reading glasses on the side table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle I don't have the heart to clear away. Upstairs, the children's rooms wait like shrines to childhood's long past, beds made with quilts I stitched while waiting for babies to be born and children to come home from school. This is my world now, measured in coffee cups and silence, in the distance between here and anywhere my children call home, in the space between sunset and sunrise when the loneliness feels heavier than the darkness itself. Yesterday, Dr. Martinez used words that no 81-year-old woman wants to hear, especially when she's sitting alone in an examination room that smells like disinfectant and broken dreams. Cancer. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from Harold's old pipe, thick and choking, and I watched his mouth keep moving, explaining things about treatments and options and time frames, but all I could think about was how Harold always said he'd go first because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving me behind. Turns out, he might still get his way after all. Stage 3, he said, like he was giving me directions to somewhere I never wanted to go. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment, he said, his voice gentle but clinical, the way you'd talk about weather or crop yields. I sat there nodding like I understood, like the words made sense, but inside I felt something crack, the way ice breaks on the pond behind the barn when winter finally loses its grip. The drive home from town stretched longer than usual, every mailbox and familiar barn looking different somehow, like I was seeing them through glass that had suddenly cracked down the middle. I kept the radio off because even gospel music felt too loud for the thoughts spinning in my head like dust devils in August. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller and more fragile than I remembered, like a strong wind might blow it away, taking all our memories with it, leaving nothing but an empty foundation and questions nobody would be around to answer. That's when they started, the questions that keep circling like buzzards over roadkill, patient and persistent and impossible to ignore. What was the point of all those years Harold and I spent building this life, raising those children, tending this land, if I'm just going to end up dying alone in a hospital bed with machines beeping around me like some sad, electronic lullaby? What was the point of all those Sunday mornings in church, all those prayers whispered over sick animals and worried nights, all those times I thanked God for small blessings and big harvests, if this is how the story ends? I've never been one to question God's plan outright, was raised better than that by parents who believed suffering built character and complaining showed weakness, but sitting here in this kitchen where I've prepared thousands of meals for people who've all moved on to other tables, other lives, other kitchens that smell like their new memories, I can't help but wonder if he's forgotten about Dorothy Mae Patterson altogether. Maybe I got lost in the shuffle of bigger prayers, more important requests from people with more important lives in more important places. Maybe my small voice from this small town got swallowed up by all the noise of a world that moves faster than Nebraska wheat grows. The silence in this house isn't peaceful anymore, the way it used to be when Harold was alive, and silence meant contentment, meant satisfaction with a day's work done and evening settling in like a comfortable old quilt. Now the silence is accusing, pointing out every empty chair and unused bedroom, every phone that doesn't ring and every letter that doesn't come, every conversation that happens around me instead of with me. Harold used to say I was the strongest woman he knew, stronger than his mother who raised 8 children during the Depression, stronger than my own mother who kept our family farm running while my father fought in France. But Harold never had to face doctors with their careful voices and treatment schedules, never had to weigh the cost of fighting against the comfort of surrender, never had to calculate whether the pain of staying was worth the fear of leaving. Some fears you can't pray away with pretty words and hopeful hymns sung by congregations that go home to full dinner tables and grandchildren who visit on weekends. Some fears require something bigger than yourself, something that speaks louder than the silence that's been swallowing me whole for 6 months now, something that proves I matter enough to be heard by a God who seems awfully busy with everyone else's troubles. Tonight, I'm going to try something I've never done before, something that feels both desperate and necessary, like throwing a rope into dark water and hoping someone on the other side catches it. I've written thousands of letters in my lifetime, thank you notes and birthday cards, Christmas greetings, and condolence messages, the kind of correspondence that keeps small communities stitched together across distances and differences. I've written to my children when they first left home, long letters full of motherly advice and local news they probably didn't want to hear about people they barely remembered. I've written to Harold's sister in Oregon, maintaining family ties that grew thinner with each passing year, and to my cousin Ruth in Missouri, sharing recipes and complaints about the weather in the way women of our generation do. But I've never written a letter like the one I'm about to write now, sitting at this kitchen table with a piece of Harold's old stationery, the kind he used for business correspondence back when farming was more than just surviving from season to season. This paper has his name embossed at the top, Harold Eugene Patterson, In letters that used to make him proud when he wrote to the bank or the grain elevator or the government agencies that seemed to multiply like weeds in a garden. Tonight, I'm borrowing his authority, his place in the world, because Dorothy Mae Patterson feels too small, too forgotten, too insignificant for what I'm about to attempt. Dear God, I write, and then stop, my hand frozen above the paper like I'm about to touch something too hot or too sacred for ordinary fingers. How do you address the creator of the universe? Do you use formal language, the kind Pastor Williams employs on Sunday mornings when he's trying to impress the congregation with his theological education, or do you talk like you would to a neighbor, direct and honest and maybe a little demanding? I've been talking to God my whole life, in morning prayers and evening gratitudes, in desperate whispers when the children were sick and silent thank yous when the harvest came in strong. But I've never tried to have a real conversation, the kind where you expect an answer back, where you lay everything out like cards on a table and wait to see what the other player does. Dear God, I write again, and this time I keep going, my pen moving across the paper like it has a mind of its own, like the words have been waiting inside me all along, just looking for permission to come out. I don't know if you're listening, or if you care about one old woman in the middle of nowhere, but I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do, and Harold always said when you're lost, the best thing is to stop walking in circles and ask for directions. The words come faster now, spilling out like water through a broken dam, and I write about the cancer eating away at me from the inside, about the loneliness that feels heavier than the Nebraska winter, about the children who love me but don't need me anymore, about the house that echoes with memories but no longer rings with laughter. I write about Harold and how much I miss the sound of his voice in the morning, about the way he used to hum while he shaved, about how the bed feels too big and too cold without his familiar weight beside me. I write about fear, the kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and sits on your chest like a cat, making it hard to breathe, hard to imagine tomorrow, hard to remember why you're supposed to keep fighting when the fight feels already lost. I write about doubt, about all those Sunday mornings when I sang hymns about God's love and faithfulness while secretly wondering if he was too busy with bigger problems to notice small troubles in small towns where nothing important ever happens. I write about desperation, about the kind of need that makes you willing to try anything, even something as foolish as writing a letter to heaven and hoping it somehow gets delivered. My hand cramps from gripping the pen too tightly, and my eyes blur from the tears I didn't know I was crying, but I keep writing until there's nothing left inside me to say, until I've emptied myself onto Harold's stationery like I'm confessing to a priest who's taken a vow of silence. When I finally stop, the letter is 3 pages long, front and back, and my kitchen feels different somehow, like the air itself has changed, like something that was locked up tight has finally been opened and released into the world. Now I'm sitting here staring at these 3 pages of my own handwriting, and I'm wondering if I've lost my mind completely, if grief and sickness have finally pushed me over the edge that separates faith from foolishness. What kind of woman writes a letter to God like he's some distant relative she's lost touch with, like he's got a mailbox somewhere in the clouds just waiting for complaints from cranky old ladies who can't handle their problems with proper Christian dignity? My mother would be horrified if she could see me now. My mother who believed suffering in silence was a virtue and that good Christian women didn't burden the Almighty with their petty troubles when there were wars to end and famines to heal and real tragedies happening to people who deserved divine intervention more than a lonely farm wife in Nebraska. She used to say that God helps those who help themselves, and what I'm doing here feels like the opposite of helping myself, feels like giving up, like admitting I'm too weak to carry my own cross the way Jesus carried his up that hill in Jerusalem. But then I remember other things too, things Pastor Williams has preached about over the years, verses about asking and receiving, about seeking and finding, about knocking and having doors opened for you. Matthew 7, verse 7, burned into my memory from years of Sunday school lessons and vacation Bible school songs that made complex theology simple enough for children to understand. Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. Those words felt easier when I was young and asking for small things, a sunny day for the church picnic, a good grade on a spelling test, a quick recovery from chicken pox. They felt more complicated when I was asking for Harold's safe return from Korea, for healthy babies to fill the nursery we'd painted yellow because we didn't know if they'd be boys or girls, for good harvests during drought years when the corn stood brown and brittle in fields that looked more like graveyards than farmland. And now, asking feels almost impossible, like I've used up my quota of divine attention, like there's a limit to how many times you can go to the same well before it runs dry. Maybe God is tired of Dorothy Mae Patterson and her endless catalog of worries and wants. Maybe he's moved on to newer believers, people with fresher faith and more interesting problems, people who live in cities where important things happen and important decisions get made. Maybe small-town prayers get put at the bottom of the pile, processed only when there's time left over from handling the real emergencies of the world. But then again, Jesus talked about sparrows, didn't he? About how not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father knowing, about how we're worth more than many sparrows, about how even the hairs on our heads are numbered like inventory in God's great storehouse of attention. If he notices sparrows, maybe he notices old women writing letters at kitchen tables in houses that feel too empty and too full of memories at the same time. If he counts hairs, maybe he counts tears too. Maybe he keeps track of the prayers that never get spoken out loud because they feel too desperate or too selfish or too much like admitting defeat. I fold the letter carefully, the way Harold used to fold important documents, business papers that needed to be filed away safely for future reference. But where do you file a letter to God? I open my Bible, the one my grandmother gave me on my 16th birthday, its leather cover soft and worn from decades of handling, its pages marked with underlined verses and margin notes written in different ink colors over the years. The binding is loose now, held together more by habit than by glue, and some of the pages flutter free when I turn them too quickly, like they're trying to escape the weight of all the seeking and searching and knocking they've witnessed over the years. I slide the letter between the pages of Psalms, somewhere near the 23rd, where David talks about walking through valleys of shadows and fearing no evil because God is with him. Maybe that's where prayers belong, nestled between promises and hope, between fear and faith, between the voice that cries out and the voice that answers back in ways we don't always recognize or understand. I close the Bible gently, like I'm tucking a child into bed, and the weight of it in my hands feels different now, heavier somehow, like it's carrying more than just words and wisdom and ancient promises. It's carrying my desperation too, my 3 pages of raw honesty folded between verses that have comforted millions of people across thousands of years, people who probably felt just as lost and forgotten as I do right now. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm hiding a letter to God inside his own book, like I'm trying to make sure he doesn't miss it, like divine mail might get lost in the cosmic shuffle if it's not filed in the right place. Harold would laugh at that thought, Harold who always said I worried too much about details that had a way of working themselves out without my help. But Harold also understood the importance of putting things where they belonged, of treating important documents with respect, of making sure the things that mattered most were kept safe and secure. Maybe this letter is the most important document I've ever written, more important than our marriage certificate or the deed to this farm or the birth certificates of our children. Maybe it's my last attempt to matter, to be heard, to prove that Dorothy Mae Patterson existed in this world and had something worth saying before she disappears into whatever comes next. The house settles around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds I've learned to interpret over decades of listening. That's the loose board in the living room floor, the one Harold always meant to fix but never got around to. That's the old radiator in the back bedroom, clicking and hissing like it's commenting on the conversation it can't quite overhear. That's the wind finding its way through the gap under the kitchen door, the same wind that's been visiting this house since we built it, carrying news from other farms and other families, stories of births and deaths and all the ordinary miracles that happen between sunrise and sunset in places too small for newspapers to notice. Tonight, that wind feels like it might carry my words somewhere they need to go, might lift my letter from between those Bible pages and deliver it to whatever address God uses for receiving mail from frightened old women who've run out of options and pride and pretense. Maybe faith isn't about knowing the right words to say or the right way to say them. Maybe faith is just about showing up, putting your truth on paper, folding it carefully, and trusting that somewhere in the vast mystery of existence, someone is listening, someone cares, someone might even write back. There's something final about closing that Bible, something that feels like sealing an envelope or dropping a letter into a mailbox slot, that moment when your words stop belonging to you and start their journey toward whoever they're meant to reach. I sit here for a long moment, my hands resting on the worn leather cover, feeling the texture of decades worth of Sunday morning services and Wednesday night prayer meetings, of desperate midnight searches for comfort and lazy afternoon readings when the work was done and the house was quiet. This Bible has been with me longer than Harold was, longer than my children lived under this roof, longer than most of the friendships I've made and lost over the years. It's been the one constant in a life full of changes, the one voice that stayed steady when everything else seemed to shift and crumble around me. And now it's become my post office, my delivery service, my direct line to heaven in a way that feels both sacred and slightly ridiculous, like I'm playing a child's game with cosmic consequences. But maybe that's what faith is supposed to feel like sometimes. Maybe the divine meets us in our desperation and accepts whatever strange rituals we create to bridge the gap between human need and heavenly help. I've done it now, taken the step that can't be undone, written the words that can't be unwritten, made the request that can't be unmade. The letter is there between those pages like a prayer made physical, like hope given weight and substance, like my voice preserved in ink and paper where it can't be forgotten or dismissed or blown away by the Nebraska wind that's been erasing smaller things than human words for centuries. There's a relief in it, the same kind of relief you feel after confessing a secret you've carried too long, after finally saying out loud the things that have been eating away at you from the inside like termites in old wood. For weeks now, maybe months, I've been carrying the weight of my diagnosis alone, letting it sit in my chest like a stone, telling myself I was being strong, being independent, being the kind of woman who doesn't burden others with her troubles. But strength and isolation aren't the same thing, and there's something almost funny about the fact that it took facing my own mortality to finally admit I might need help, might deserve attention, might matter enough to ask for something bigger than myself. The kitchen feels different now, charged somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm when you can feel electricity building in the clouds even though the sky still looks peaceful. I can almost imagine my words rising up through the ceiling, through the roof, through the layers of atmosphere that separate this farmhouse from whatever realm God inhabits, traveling at the speed of desperate prayer toward ears that might actually be listening. It's a foolish thought, I know, the kind of magical thinking that rational people are supposed to outgrow by the time they reach their 80s, but rational thinking hasn't gotten me very far lately, hasn't provided much comfort or guidance or hope for what comes next. Maybe it's time to try irrational thinking, to embrace the possibility that the universe operates according to rules I don't understand, that there might be postal systems beyond human comprehension, that letters to God don't require stamps or addresses or any of the normal mechanisms that move messages from one place to another. I think about all the prayers I've spoken over the years, the quick grace before meals and the longer petitions during Sunday services, the whispered pleas during labor pains and the grateful shouts when harvests exceeded expectations. Were those letters too, just delivered through different channels, carried by sound waves instead of paper airplanes, received by divine ears instead of divine hands? Maybe what I've done tonight isn't so different from what I've been doing my whole life. Maybe I've just changed the delivery method, upgraded from voicemail to registered mail, moved from hope to desperation to a place beyond both where the only thing left is honest communication between one's soul and whatever force keeps the stars in their courses and the seasons in their proper order. The house settles deeper into the evening around me, and I realize I'm not afraid anymore, not of the cancer or the loneliness or the possibility that my letter might go unanswered. There's something powerful about putting your truth into the world, about making your need visible even if you're the only one who sees it, about refusing to suffer in silence just because silence feels more dignified than crying out loud. Maybe God doesn't answer letters the way people do, with written responses that arrive in timely fashion with clear instructions and obvious solutions. Maybe divine mail works differently, maybe the answer is already on its way through channels I can't see or imagine, Maybe help comes disguised as coincidence or stranger kindness or sudden changes in circumstances that feel random until you look back and see the pattern, the careful orchestration of events that could only happen if someone with infinite patience and perfect timing was paying attention to your smallest details. I've sent my letter now, delivered it to the only address I know for heaven, and there's nothing left to do but wait and watch and trust that somewhere in the vast mystery of existence, Dorothy Mae Patterson has been heard. There's something final about closing that Bible, something that feels like sealing an envelope or dropping a letter into a mailbox slot, that moment when your words stop belonging to you and start their journey toward whoever they're meant to reach. I sit here for a long moment, my hands resting on the worn leather cover, feeling the texture of decades worth of Sunday morning services and Wednesday night prayer meetings, of desperate midnight searches for comfort and lazy afternoon readings when the work was done and the house was quiet. This Bible has been with me longer than Harold was, longer than my children lived under this roof, longer than most of the friendships I've made and lost over the years. It's been the one constant in a life full of changes, the one voice that stayed steady when everything else seemed to shift and crumble around me. And now it's become my post office, my delivery service, my direct line to heaven in a way that feels both sacred and slightly ridiculous, like I'm playing a child's game with cosmic consequences. But maybe that's what faith is supposed to feel like sometimes. Maybe the divine meets us in our desperation and accepts whatever strange rituals we create to bridge the gap between human need and heavenly help. I've done it now, taken the step that can't be undone, written the words that can't be unwritten, made the request that can't be unmade. The letter is there between those pages like a prayer made physical, like hope given weight and substance, like my voice preserved in ink and paper where it can't be forgotten or dismissed or blown away by the Nebraska wind that's been erasing smaller things than human words for centuries. There's a relief in it, the same kind of relief you feel after confessing a secret you've carried too long, after finally saying out loud the things that have been eating away at you from the inside like termites in old wood. For weeks now, maybe months, I've been carrying the weight of my diagnosis alone, letting it sit in my chest like a stone, telling myself I was being strong, being independent, being the kind of woman who doesn't burden others with her troubles. But strength and isolation aren't the same thing, and there's something almost funny about the fact that it took facing my own mortality to finally admit I might need help, might deserve attention, might matter enough to ask for something bigger than myself. The kitchen feels different now, charged somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm when you can feel electricity building in the clouds even though the sky still looks peaceful. I can almost imagine my words rising up through the ceiling, through the roof, through the layers of atmosphere that separate this farmhouse from whatever realm God inhabits, traveling at the speed of desperate prayer toward ears that might actually be listening. It's a foolish thought, I know, the kind of magical thinking that rational people are supposed to outgrow by the time they reach their 80s, but rational thinking hasn't gotten me very far lately, hasn't provided much comfort or guidance or hope for what comes next. Maybe it's time to try irrational thinking, to embrace the possibility that the universe operates according to rules I don't understand, that there might be postal systems beyond human comprehension, that letters to God don't require stamps or addresses or any of the normal mechanisms that move messages from one place to another. I think about all the prayers I've spoken over the years, the quick grace before meals and the longer petitions during Sunday services, the whispered pleas during labor pains and the grateful shouts when harvests exceeded expectations. Were those letters too, just delivered through different channels, carried by sound waves instead of paper airplanes, received by divine ears instead of divine hands? Maybe what I've done tonight isn't so different from what I've been doing my whole life. Maybe I've just changed the delivery method, upgraded from voicemail to registered mail, moved from hope to desperation to a place beyond both where the only thing left is honest communication between one's soul and whatever force keeps the stars in their courses and the seasons in their proper order. The house settles deeper into the evening around me, and I realize I'm not afraid anymore, not of the cancer or the loneliness or the possibility that my letter might go unanswered. There's something powerful about putting your truth into the world, about making your need visible even if you're the only one who sees it, about refusing to suffer in silence just because silence feels more dignified than crying out loud. Maybe God doesn't answer letters the way people do, with written responses that arrive in timely fashion with clear instructions and obvious solutions. Maybe divine mail works differently. Maybe the answer is already on its way through channels I can't see or imagine. Maybe help comes disguised as coincidence or stranger kindness or sudden changes in circumstances that feel random until you look back and see the pattern, the careful orchestration of events that could only happen if someone with infinite patience and perfect timing was paying attention to your smallest details. I've sent my letter now, delivered it to the only address I know for heaven, and there's nothing left to do but wait and watch and trust that somewhere in the vast mystery of existence, Dorothy Mae Patterson has been heard. Monday morning arrives with the kind of gray sky that matches my mood, heavy and pressing down on everything like a wool blanket in summer heat. I catch myself checking the Bible again, opening it to the Psalms where my letter waits between the pages like a bookmark marking a place I'm afraid to revisit. The paper looks exactly the same as when I put it there. No mysterious marks or divine annotations, no signs that anyone has read it and found it worthy of response. Part of me wonders if I should write another letter, maybe explain things more clearly or ask for more specific help, like those people who keep calling customer service until they get the answer they want. But that feels too much like nagging, too much like the kind of pushy behavior my mother always warned me against. The kind that makes people avoid you at church socials and cross the street when they see you coming. Tuesday I find myself staring at the telephone, that black rotary model Harold installed in the kitchen 20 years ago because he said push-button phones were a passing fad that cost too much money for people who had perfectly good fingers for dialing. The phone hasn't rung in 3 days, not even wrong numbers or those salespeople who call during dinner time trying to sell magazine subscriptions or life insurance to people old enough to know exactly how much life they have left to insure. I consider calling Michael in San Francisco, but the time difference makes it complicated, and besides, what would I say? That I'm writing letters to God and expecting delivery confirmations? That I'm disappointed in divine customer service? That the cancer is still there and the loneliness is getting worse and maybe he should start thinking about what to do with 800 acres and a house full of furniture nobody wants. Wednesday brings rain, the kind of steady, persistent drizzle that Harold used to say was good for the crops but murder on arthritis, and I spend the day watching water run down the windows in patterns that remind me of tears on cheeks, of sadness made visible and given weight. The house creaks more when it's wet, like it's complaining about age and neglect, like it's trying to tell me something I'm not wise enough to understand. I walk through the rooms, really looking at them for the first time in months, seeing how the wallpaper is peeling in the corners and the floors need refinishing and the whole place has that tired, defeated look of something that's been maintained but not really cared for, not really lived in with the kind of energy and attention that makes a house feel like a home. Thursday I drive past the cemetery where Harold rests under a simple granite headstone that reads, "Beloved husband and father," in letters that seemed adequate when I chose them but now feel insufficient for containing 47 years of marriage and 3 children and a lifetime of small kindnesses that nobody but me remembers. I don't stop, don't get out to pull weeds or leave flowers or have one of those one-sided conversations that other widows seem to find comforting. Because talking to headstones feels too much like talking to walls, too much like admitting that the people we love become silent when they leave us, become memories instead of companions, become past tense when we need them to stay present tense forever. Friday I bake a pie for no particular reason, apple cinnamon with the recipe my grandmother taught me when I was 12 and thought cooking was magic and women who could create something delicious from flour and sugar and fruit were the most powerful people in the world. The kitchen fills with the smell of home and comfort and all the ordinary miracles that happen when you mix ingredients together with enough patience and faith to trust that heat and time will transform simple things into something wonderful. But when the pie comes out of the oven, golden brown and perfect, I realize I have nobody to share it with, nobody to appreciate the way the crust flakes just right or the way the apples hold their shape without getting mushy, and the accomplishment feels hollow, like applauding for an empty theater. Saturday I clean out Harold's closet, a task I've been avoiding for months because touching his clothes feels too intimate, too final, too much like admitting that he won't be needing them anymore. His shirts still smell like him, like Old Spice aftershave and honest sweat and the pipe tobacco he never quite gave up despite my years of nagging about lung cancer and fire hazards and setting a good example for the children. I fold everything carefully, the way he liked his clothes folded, and pack them into boxes for the church donation center, though I keep his favorite flannel shirt, the blue one with the soft collar and the small hole near the left pocket where he caught it on a fence wire during corn harvest 3 years ago. That shirt hangs in my closet now, next to dresses I rarely wear and sweaters that seem too cheerful for my current state of mind, and sometimes I hold it against my face and try to remember what it felt like to be half of something instead of a whole person walking around with pieces missing. Sunday I venture back to church, sliding into our usual pew just as Pastor Williams begins his sermon about patience and perseverance and the importance of waiting on the Lord's timing even when our own timing seems more urgent, more practical, more suited to the reality of human lifespans and medical diagnoses. His words feel directed at me, though I know that's probably paranoia or guilt or the way desperate people find personal messages in fortune cookies and horoscopes and random conversations overheard in grocery store checkout lines. After the service, Mrs. Henderson approaches with that careful smile people wear when they're about to say something they think is helpful but probably isn't, and she tells me about her nephew in Omaha who's doing wonderful things with cancer treatment, as if cancer is a hobby that can be improved with the right equipment and enough enthusiasm. I thank her for the information and promise to look into it, though we both know I'm just being polite, just going through the motions of hope because giving up feels too much like admitting defeat. Tuesday night brings the kind of storm that makes even lifelong Nebraskans pause and take notice, the kind that builds slowly on the horizon all day like a dark promise, growing taller and angrier as evening approaches, gathering strength from the heat and humidity that's been pressing down on the plains like a heavy hand all week. I can feel it coming in my bones, that old reliable weather forecasting system that Harold used to tease me about but secretly trusted more than the meteorologists on television with their satellite images and computer models and confident predictions that turned out wrong half the time. The air pressure drops so low it makes my ears pop and my arthritis flare up in joints I'd forgotten existed, and the chickens huddle together in their coop with that nervous energy animals get when they sense something bigger than themselves approaching fast. The first lightning comes just after sunset, flickering like a faulty fluorescent bulb across clouds that look thick enough to walk on, followed by thunder that starts as a low rumble and builds to the kind of crash that rattles windows and makes you remember how small you are in the face of nature's casual violence. I've weathered hundreds of storms in this house, maybe thousands, but tonight feels different somehow, more personal, like the sky has something specific against Dorothy Mae Patterson and her quiet little corner of Nebraska. The wind picks up gradually, then suddenly, going from gentle whispers in the wheat fields to howling complaints that sound almost human, almost angry, like voices of the disappointed dead demanding answers to questions nobody wants to hear. Rain follows, first in fat scattered drops that splat against the kitchen window like thrown pebbles, then in sheets so thick I can't see the barn 50 yards away, so heavy the gutters overflow and water streams down the sides of the house like tears on an old woman's face. The lights flicker once, twice, then hold steady while I debate whether to unplug the television and the refrigerator, the way Harold always did during bad storms because he said lightning could travel through power lines and fry every electrical appliance in the house faster than you could say insurance claim. But before I can make up my mind, the decision gets made for me. One moment the kitchen is lit by the familiar warm glow of overhead fixtures and table lamps, the next moment everything goes black, so suddenly and completely that for a second I wonder if I've gone blind, if this is how it ends for Dorothy Mae Patterson, not with cancer or loneliness but with the simple failure of eyes that have seen 81 years worth of sunrises and sunsets and have finally decided they've seen enough. But then lightning flashes again, illuminating the kitchen in stark white relief for just long enough to remind me that the darkness is external, not internal, that somewhere between the thunder and the rain and the wind that sounds like it's trying to tear the roof off, the storm has knocked out power lines and plunged half the county into the kind of darkness our ancestors knew intimately but that feels foreign and threatening to people who've grown accustomed to flipping switches and banishing night with the casual gesture of modern convenience. I fumble around in the junk drawer where Harold kept flashlights and candles and batteries, feeling my way through the accumulated debris of 40 years of just-in-case thinking, the kind of practical preparedness that Depression-era people never quite outgrow even when times are good and electricity seems as reliable as gravity. My fingers find the big flashlight Harold used for checking on animals during calving season, but when I push the switch, nothing happens, and I remember too late that the batteries died last winter and I never got around to replacing them because winter emergencies always seem impossible to imagine during summer plenty. The smaller flashlight works, but its beam is weak and yellow, the kind of sickly light that makes everything look worse than it actually is, that turns familiar furniture into strange shapes and friendly rooms into alien landscapes where you're not sure of your footing or your direction. I'm making my way toward the linen closet where I keep emergency candles, moving slowly and carefully because the house feels different in the dark, feels like a place I've never been before even though I could walk through these rooms blindfolded after 4 decades of living here. When my foot catches on something, maybe the loose edge of the kitchen rug or maybe just my own clumsiness in the unfamiliar darkness, I fall hard, my hip striking the linoleum floor with a sound like a gunshot, pain shooting through my left leg in waves that make me gasp and see stars even in the blackness that surrounds me. For a moment I just lie there, stunned and hurting and suddenly aware of how completely alone I am, how far the nearest neighbor lives, how unlikely it is that anyone will miss me or look for me or even notice if Dorothy Mae Patterson simply disappears into the storm like she never existed at all. The pain in my hip is sharp and immediate, the kind that tells you something important has been damaged, something that might not heal right even if you get help, which seems increasingly unlikely as I lie here on the cold linoleum floor listening to the storm rage outside like it's personally angry with this house, this farm, this old woman who had the audacity to think she could write letters to heaven and expect prompt replies. I try to move my left leg and discover that while it's not broken, exactly, it's certainly not willing to support my weight, and the simple act of shifting positions sends lightning bolts of pain shooting from my hip down to my knee and back up to my lower ribs, where something else might be bruised or cracked from the impact of hitting the floor. The flashlight fell when I did, and its weak beam now points uselessly at the ceiling, casting strange shadows that dance and flicker with the storm outside, making the familiar kitchen look like something from a nightmare, all wrong angles and threatening shapes where comfortable furniture used to be. I reach for the flashlight, stretching as far as I can without moving my injured leg, my fingertips just barely grazing the plastic casing before it rolls further away, mocking my efforts with the kind of cruel physics that only applies when you're already down and desperate and running out of options. The storm shows no signs of letting up. If anything, it's getting worse, the wind howling through gaps in the house's defenses that I never noticed when Harold was alive to fix things as they broke, when the responsibility for maintaining 46 years' worth of accumulated wear and tear didn't rest entirely on shoulders that were never designed to carry such weight alone. Rain pounds against the windows with increasing violence, and somewhere in the distance I hear what might be a tree falling, that distinctive crack and crash that means tomorrow there will be new damage to assess, new problems to solve, assuming I live to see tomorrow, assuming I don't simply lie here on this kitchen floor until the cancer or the loneliness or simple exposure finishes what the storm started. The telephone sits on the counter above me, impossibly far away, might as well be on the moon for all the good it does me now, and even if I could reach it, even if the phone lines survived the storm, who would I call? Michael in San Francisco, who's probably asleep by now, who would panic and catch the first flight to Nebraska and arrive to find his mother's body decomposing in a kitchen that smells like death and failure. Sarah in Denver, who has 3 children and a teaching job and a husband who already thinks she spends too much time worrying about parents who should be able to take care of themselves. Tommy in Chicago, who sends Christmas cards but never calls, who probably wouldn't answer his phone even if I could dial it, who might not even remember what his childhood home looks like anymore. The neighbors are too far away to hear me scream, and screaming seems pointless anyway when the storm is making enough noise to drown out everything else, when my voice would just be another small sound lost in the symphony of wind and rain and thunder that's been building all evening toward this crescendo of destruction and despair. I think about the letter folded between the pages of my Bible, about how foolish I was to imagine that writing words on paper could bridge the gap between human need and divine attention, how naive to think that God has time to read mail from forgotten old women in Nebraska farmhouses when there are wars and famines and real tragedies happening to people who matter more than Dorothy Mae Patterson ever did or ever will. Maybe this is my answer. Maybe this storm and this fall and this slow realization that I'm going to die alone on my kitchen floor is God's way of responding to my letter, His way of saying that some prayers aren't worth answering, some people aren't worth saving, some lives have simply run their course and overstayed their welcome in a world that needs room for younger, stronger, more deserving souls. The darkness around me feels alive now, pressing against my skin like wet wool, filling my lungs with the kind of thickness that makes every breath a conscious effort, a small victory against forces that want me to simply stop trying, stop fighting, stop believing that tomorrow might be different from today in any way that matters. I've been lying here for what feels like hours but is probably only minutes, and already my body is starting to stiffen from the cold and the dampness that seeps through the floorboards from the basement where Harold stored tools and preserves and all the practical accumulations of a life spent preparing for emergencies that never quite looked like this one. My hip throbs with each heartbeat, a painful rhythm that reminds me I'm still alive even though being alive feels more like punishment than blessing right now. More like an endurance test designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor and unlimited patience for watching old women suffer in the dark. This is how it ends, I think, not with dignity or surrounded by loved ones or in some peaceful hospital bed with morphine drips and sympathetic nurses, but alone and broken on a kitchen floor in a house that will probably stand empty for months before anyone bothers to check on the woman who used to live here, who used to matter to someone, who used to believe that prayers get answered and letters get delivered and God pays attention to sparrows falling and hairs being numbered and all the small, desperate details of ordinary lives that suddenly seem extraordinary when they're about to end. I must have drifted in and out of consciousness, because suddenly there's a sound that doesn't belong to the storm, a steady rumbling that cuts through the wind and rain like a bass note in a symphony of chaos. At first I think it might be more thunder, the kind that rolls across the plains for miles and miles, but this sound has a mechanical quality to it, a human-made rhythm that speaks of engines and gears and people who are still moving through the world while I lie motionless on my kitchen floor waiting for morning or death, whichever comes first. The sound grows louder, closer, and through the fog of pain and despair I realize it's a truck, a big one by the sound of it, probably one of those long-haul semis that use our county roads as shortcuts between bigger highways, drivers who know these back roads well enough to navigate them even in weather that keeps sensible people home with their doors locked and their prayers whispered. The engine sound changes, downshifting, slowing, and impossibly, incredibly, it seems to be turning into my driveway, though that makes no sense because my driveway doesn't lead anywhere except to this farmhouse where nothing important ever happens, where no one ever comes except the mailman and Pastor Williams and the occasional salesman who's lost enough to think rural Nebraska might be fertile ground for vacuum cleaners or encyclopedias or whatever hope they're peddling door to door. The truck stops, engine idling like a heartbeat in the storm, and I hear a door slam, then footsteps on the gravel, quick and purposeful despite the rain that must be making everything slippery and treacherous. Someone is walking toward my house, someone who doesn't know that Dorothy Mae Patterson is lying broken on her kitchen floor, someone who might just walk back to their truck and drive away when no one answers their knock, leaving me here to finish dying in the dark the way I started. But then there's a pounding on the front door, loud and insistent, the kind of knocking that demands attention, that refuses to be ignored, and a voice calls out over the storm, young and male and concerned in a way that makes my heart jump despite the pain and the fear and the certainty that this is probably just my imagination conjuring rescue where none exists. Hello? Is anyone home? Your lights are out and I wanted to make sure you're okay. The voice comes again, clearer this time, and it's real, it's definitely real. There's actually someone out there in this storm who cares enough about a dark farmhouse to stop and check, someone who thinks Dorothy Mae Patterson might be worth saving. I try to call back but my voice comes out as barely a whisper, lost in the sounds of wind and rain and my own ragged breathing, not nearly loud enough to reach the front door through walls and distance and the acoustic competition of Nebraska weather at its worst. The knocking comes again, more urgent now, and the voice calls out, "I'm going to check around back, make sure you're not hurt," and I hear those footsteps moving around the house, splashing through puddles and fighting the storm to reach windows he can peer through, doors he can try, looking for signs of life in a place that probably looks abandoned from the outside, dark and still and seemingly empty of everything except accumulated loneliness and deferred hope. Then there's a rattling at the kitchen door, the back entrance that Harold always preferred because it led directly to the part of the house where real life happened, where families gathered and meals were shared and important conversations took place around tables that had witnessed decades of joy and sorrow and all the ordinary miracles that happen between people who love each other enough to stay in the same place long enough to build something lasting. The door is locked, of course, but it's an old lock on an old door in an old house. And apparently this young man knows something about persistence and problem solving because after a moment I hear a different sound, the kind of careful scraping that suggests he's found the spare key Harold hid under the flower pot by the steps, the same hiding place we've used for 40 years because burglars don't usually drive truck routes through Nebraska farmland during thunderstorms. The door opens and a beam of light cuts through the darkness, bright and steady and professional. The kind of flashlight that actually works when you need it to, carried by someone who thinks ahead and prepares for emergencies and probably changes batteries before they die. "Ma'am? Are you in here? I saw your house was dark and wanted to make sure everything was okay." The light sweeps across the kitchen and finds me lying on the floor like a discarded rag doll, and suddenly the beam steadies on my face and there's a sharp intake of breath. The sound of someone who wasn't expecting to find what he was looking for, who was probably hoping for an empty house and a simple power outage rather than an injured old woman and a situation that requires action, involvement, the kind of Good Samaritan behavior that complicates travel schedules and extends short stops into longer commitments. "Oh my God, ma'am, what happened? Are you hurt?" The voice is closer now, filled with genuine concern and the kind of competent energy that suggests this young man knows how to handle emergencies, how to think clearly under pressure, how to help people who can't help themselves. I try to answer but my throat is dry and my voice sounds strange even to me, cracked and fragile like old paper, but I manage to whisper, "I fell. Can't get up. Hip." Simple words that don't begin to explain the depth of my situation, the layers of despair and abandonment and desperate prayer that led to this moment, but enough to communicate the basic problem to someone who seems capable of providing basic solutions. The light comes closer and I can see him now, young and tall and soaked from the rain, wearing a baseball cap and a denim jacket that's probably not nearly warm enough for this weather, with kind eyes and calloused hands and the sort of face that mothers trust instinctively, that grandmothers recognize as belonging to the kind of young man who stops for stranded motorists and helps elderly neighbors carry groceries and calls home regularly because he knows his family worries about him driving these empty roads alone. "Okay, don't try to move, I'm going to help you," he says, and there's something in his voice that reminds me of my own children when they were young and confident and certain that every problem had a solution if you just approached it with enough determination and care. He moves with the kind of careful efficiency that comes from experience, this young man who appeared out of the storm like an answer to a prayer I was afraid had gone unheard, and within minutes he's helped me to a sitting position against the kitchen cabinets, found a bag of frozen peas in my freezer to put against my hip, and located the working flashlight that Harold kept in the utility room for emergencies exactly like this one. His name is David, he tells me, David Morrison, and he drives freight between Kansas City and Denver, has been running this route for 3 years now and knows every back road and shortcut between here and Colorado, knows which farmhouses usually have lights on at night and which ones stand empty because families have moved away or died off or simply given up fighting the economic realities that make small farming feel more like slow suicide than honest work. He's maybe 30 years old, with sandy brown hair that curls around the edges of his cap and a smile that transforms his whole face when he uses it, which he does often despite the circumstances, despite finding a half-conscious old woman on a kitchen floor in the middle of a thunderstorm that's probably making his delivery schedule impossible to maintain. "We need to get you checked out," he says after examining my hip as gently as possible, his hands careful and respectful in a way that tells me he was raised right, taught to treat elderly women like someone's beloved grandmother instead of inconvenient obstacles to be worked around or ignored. "I don't think anything's broken, but you've got some serious bruising and you shouldn't be alone tonight, not with the power out and this storm still going strong." I try to protest, to tell him I'll be fine, that I've weathered worse things than a fall and a power outage, but even as the words form in my mouth I know they're not true, know that I'm in no condition to take care of myself right now, know that pride is a luxury I can't afford when help has literally walked through my door carrying a flashlight and wearing a concerned expression that reminds me so much of Tommy at that age that it makes my chest ache with memories of children who used to need me, who used to think I could fix anything that went wrong in their small, safe world. David helps me to his truck, a massive red Peterbilt that sits in my driveway like a mechanical dinosaur, all chrome and diesel power and the kind of commanding presence that makes other vehicles look like toys in comparison. The cab is warm and dry and surprisingly comfortable, with a sleeper berth behind the seats and enough electronic equipment to run a small business, CB radios, and GPS systems and other devices I don't recognize but that suggest this young man takes his work seriously, approaches driving the same way Harold approached farming, with attention to detail and respect for the tools of the trade. The drive to Cedar Falls Emergency Clinic takes 20 minutes that feel like 20 seconds. David's hands steady on the wheel despite the rain that makes visibility nearly impossible, his voice calm and reassuring as he talks about inconsequential things, the weather and the roads and the load of farm equipment he's hauling to a dealer in Colorado. Conversation designed to keep me distracted from the pain and the fear and the surreal nature of being rescued by a complete stranger who has no reason to care about Dorothy Mae Patterson's problems but seems to care anyway. Dr. Martinez is working the night shift, a coincidence that feels too convenient to be accidental, and he examines my hip with the same gentle thoroughness he used when delivering my cancer diagnosis, his hands professional and impersonal but somehow comforting in their competence. Nothing broken, as David suspected, but significant bruising and some strained ligaments that will keep me moving slowly for the next few weeks, assuming I live that long. Assuming the cancer doesn't decide to accelerate its timeline while I'm dealing with this new inconvenience. David waits while I'm being examined, filling out paperwork and handling details I'm too shaken to manage myself, and when Dr. Martinez suggests I stay overnight for observation, David immediately offers to drive me home instead, promises to check on me in the morning before he heads back to Kansas City. Speaks with the kind of quiet authority that makes medical professionals trust his judgment even though they've never seen him before. On the way back to the farm, we stop at the 24-hour grocery store where David insists on buying supplies, milk and bread and soup and batteries for my flashlights, refusing my money with a wave of his hand and that smile that lights up his whole face. "My grandmother always told me that God works through people," he says as he carries my groceries to the truck. Rain still falling but lighter now, the storm moving on to torment other counties, other farmhouses, other old women who might or might not have young men with kind hearts and good timing appearing in their driveways at the exact moment when hope seems impossible and rescue feels like a fairy tale. She said when someone needs help and you're in a position to provide it, that's not coincidence, that's assignment, and you don't question assignments from the Almighty. You just do what needs doing and trust that the reasons will make sense eventually, even if they don't make sense right now. Back at the farmhouse, David checks every room with his flashlight, making sure the storm hasn't caused damage beyond the power outage, his footsteps echoing through rooms that haven't heard masculine presence since Harold passed, his voice calling out observations about loose shutters and a small leak in the back bedroom that we'll need to address once the weather clears. He finds candles in the linen closet and lights them throughout the house, transforming the darkness from something threatening into something almost cozy, almost peaceful, the kind of golden glow that makes even familiar spaces feel magical, sacred, touched by something larger than everyday electric convenience. When he's satisfied that I'm safe and settled with everything I need within reach, He sits at my kitchen table and accepts the cup of coffee I insist on making despite his protests that I should be resting, that he should be the one taking care of me instead of the other way around. But making coffee gives me something to do with my hands, something normal and domestic and hostess-like that makes me feel useful again, needed again, like Dorothy Mae Patterson still has something to offer the world besides complaints and medical bills and letters to God that probably sound like the desperate ramblings of a lonely old woman who's lost her grip on reality. We sit there in the candlelight, this unexpected guest and I, drinking coffee that tastes better than it has in months. Maybe because everything tastes better when you're sharing it with someone else. Maybe because gratitude is the best seasoning for simple pleasures. Maybe because this whole evening has been so strange and miraculous that even instant coffee seems transformed by whatever force brought David Morrison to my door at exactly the moment when I needed him most. He tells me about his grandmother, the one who taught him about God working through people, about assignments and coincidences and the importance of paying attention when life puts you in position to help someone who can't help themselves. She raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, taught him to drive these same roads I've traveled for decades, taught him that every person you meet is fighting some kind of battle you can't see, taught him that kindness costs nothing but can mean everything to someone who's forgotten what it feels like to matter to another human being. His grandmother passed 2 years ago, he says, cancer just like mine, and in those final weeks she made him promise that he'd always stop when he saw someone in trouble, always help when he could, always remember that being in the right place at the right time with the right resources isn't accident, it's responsibility. As he talks, something shifts inside me, some recognition that feels too profound for coincidence, too perfectly timed for randomness, too exactly what I needed to hear for this to be just chance encounter between strangers caught in the same storm. This young man appeared at my door carrying light in the darkness, strength when I was weak, help when I had given up hope of being helped, appearing not with fanfare or angelic choruses but with muddy boots and a concerned voice and hands that knew how to lift fallen women and hearts that knew how to care about people they'd never met before and might never see again. I think about the letter folded between the pages of my Bible, about my desperate words written to a God I wasn't sure was listening, about my plea for some sign that Dorothy Mae Patterson still mattered in a universe that seemed to have forgotten her name and address, and the fact that she was still here, still breathing, still hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, gave a damn about her small troubles in her small corner of an enormous world. I think about my disappointment when morning after morning brought no obvious answer, no dramatic intervention, no clear response to my carefully written petition for divine attention and assistance. I think about how I expected God to reply the same way people reply, with letters or phone calls or obvious miracles that leave no doubt about their source and meaning, with the kind of unmistakable communication that satisfies human need for proof and clarity and specific instructions about what to do next. But sitting here in candlelight with this young stranger who stopped in a storm to check on a dark farmhouse, who found me broken on my kitchen floor and didn't hesitate to help, who speaks about his grandmother's wisdom and divine assignments and the way God works through human hands instead of supernatural interventions, I begin to understand that maybe answers don't always look the way we expect them to look. Maybe help doesn't always arrive wearing halos and wings. Maybe God's voice sounds less like thunder from heaven and more like a concerned young man asking if you're okay when you're lying hurt and alone in the dark. Maybe this is my reply, this unexpected kindness from an unexpected source, this reminder that the world still contains people who care about strangers, who stop for dark houses and worried hearts, who carry light into darkness and hope into despair without being asked, without expecting anything in return except the satisfaction of knowing they answered when someone needed them to answer. David leaves the next morning after the storm passes and the power company restores electricity to our county, but he doesn't leave empty-handed. I sent him away with a thermos full of coffee and half of yesterday's apple pie wrapped in aluminum foil, the pie I baked for no one in particular, the pie that now has purpose and destination and someone who will appreciate the way the crust flakes and the apples hold their shape just right. He promises to stop on his return trip from Colorado, says he wants to check on my hip and make sure the leak in the back bedroom got properly fixed, And I believe him because his eyes hold the kind of honesty that can't be faked, the kind of integrity that makes promises feel like contracts written in something more permanent than words. As I watch his truck disappear down the county road, I realize something fundamental has shifted in the way I see the world, in the way I understand the conversation between heaven and earth, between divine intention and human action, between prayers spoken in desperation and answers delivered through the most ordinary, most extraordinary channel of all. People who choose to care about other people for no better reason than that caring is what connects us all, what makes us more than just isolated souls wandering through our separate sorrows. The days that follow feel different, charged with possibility I hadn't noticed before, marked by small encounters that might have seemed insignificant a week ago but now feel laden with meaning, with potential, with the kind of divine fingerprints that are visible only when you're looking for them with the right kind of eyes. Mrs. Henderson at the post office asks about my hip with genuine concern, not the polite inquiry of someone making conversation but the worried attention of someone who actually cares whether Dorothy Mae Patterson is healing properly, whether she needs help with anything too heavy to lift, whether there's anything the community can do to make recovery easier for a woman who's been carrying too much weight alone for too long. Pete Kowalski drives over Tuesday afternoon with a casserole his wife Ruth made before she got too sick to cook, says she wanted me to have it because she remembers what it's like to be laid up and unable to do much for yourself, says Ruth always believed that food was love made visible, that casseroles were prayers you could taste, that sharing meals was one of the oldest forms of worship known to humanity. When he leaves, I realize I haven't had a real conversation with a neighbor in months, haven't allowed myself to be vulnerable enough to accept help or offer it, haven't participated in the web of mutual care that holds small communities together when the world outside seems determined to tear everything apart. Pastor Williams visits Thursday, but this time when he settles into Harold's chair and starts talking about God's plan and divine timing, I find myself listening with different ears, hearing not empty platitudes but genuine attempts to comfort, not religious jargon but real faith wrestling with real questions about suffering and purpose and the way grace operates in a broken world. When he asks if there's anything specific he can pray for, I surprise us both by telling him about the letter, about my desperate attempt to get God's attention, about David appearing in the storm like an answer I hadn't known how to recognize. Pastor Williams doesn't look shocked or concerned about my mental state. Instead, he smiles with the kind of recognition that comes from years of watching divine comedy unfold in human lives, from seeing how God's sense of humor tends toward the subtle, the unexpected, the perfectly timed interventions that look like coincidence until you step back far enough to see the pattern. God rarely shouts, he says, his voice gentle with understanding, but he never stops whispering, never stops working through the people who are willing to be his hands and feet and voice in the world. Sometimes the most profound prayers get answered by the most ordinary miracles, and the most ordinary miracles look like truck drivers with kind hearts and grandmother's wisdom. Sunday I return to church with something I haven't felt in months, curiosity about what comes next, interest in being part of something larger than my own small troubles, desire to participate in the community of faith instead of just enduring it. During the closing hymn, when we sing about amazing grace and how it saves souls like mine, I find myself thinking about David and his grandmother, about the chain of kindness that stretches back through generations and forward into futures we can't see, about the way love multiplies when it's shared instead of hoarded, about how God's answers often come wearing work clothes and speaking with human voices and arriving exactly when we need them most, even if they don't look anything like what we thought we wanted. The cancer is still there, of course, the diagnosis unchanged by divine intervention or human kindness, but somehow it feels less like a death sentence and more like a deadline, less like punishment and more like motivation to use whatever time remains in ways that matter, in ways that contribute to the network of care and connection that makes life bearable for all of us who are fighting battles nobody else can see. I've learned that prayer isn't just about asking for things you want. It's about opening yourself to receive things you need, about becoming the kind of person who can recognize answers when they arrive wearing unexpected faces, about joining the ancient conversation between heaven and earth that happens every time someone chooses love over indifference, kindness over convenience, hope over despair. 3 weeks later, I find myself back at the kitchen table where this story began, sitting in the same chair where I wrote my desperate letter to God, but everything is different now, changed in ways both subtle and profound, the way sunrise changes darkness not all at once but gradually, inevitably, until you realize the world has been transformed while you weren't paying attention. The table is the same, Harold's coffee mug still sits in the same spot with the same chip on the handle, the morning light still streams through the same windows at the same angle it has for 46 years, but the quality of silence has changed from accusatory to peaceful, from empty to full of possibility, from the silence of abandonment to the silence of anticipation. This morning I'm writing again, but not to God this time. This morning I'm writing to David, a thank you note that tries to capture gratitude too large for words, appreciation too deep for language, recognition too profound for ordinary expressions of politeness. How do you thank someone for being the answer to a prayer they didn't even know they were answering? How do you explain to a young truck driver that his grandmother's wisdom about divine assignments saved more than just an old woman's hip, that his willingness to stop and help change the way Dorothy Mae Patterson understands the conversation between heaven and earth? The letter grows longer than I intended, filled with details about healing hip bones and restored faith, about neighbors who become friends and community that's become family, about the way one act of unexpected kindness can ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, creating circles of care that expand far beyond their original impact. I tell him about Mrs. Henderson, who now saves my mail when I can't make it to town, about Pete Kowalski, who checks on me twice a week and brings Ruth's messages of encouragement along with garden vegetables and small-town gossip that makes me feel connected to the larger story of our community. I tell him about Pastor Williams, who visits not just monthly now but whenever he's driving past, who stops for coffee and conversation that feels more like friendship than pastoral duty, who helped me understand that God's voice often sounds remarkably like human voices offering help when help is needed most. I tell him about the Bible that sits here beside me, still holding the letter I wrote that desperate night, but now the pages around it are marked with verses about answered prayers and unexpected blessings, about the way love travels through human hands and divine plans unfold through ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because it's the right thing to do. When I finish writing to David, I start another letter, this one to Michael in San Francisco, telling him about the storm and the fall and the stranger who appeared with light in the darkness, sharing the story not because I need sympathy or assistance but because I want him to know that his mother has remembered how to hope again, how to see God's fingerprints in everyday kindness, how to believe that the world still contains more helpers than harmers, more light than darkness, more love than fear. The morning stretches ahead of me, full of small tasks and quiet pleasures, phone calls to make and people to thank, a community to rejoin and a faith to practice in ways that look less like begging and more like believing, less like desperation and more like participation in the ancient dance between asking and receiving, between human need and divine provision, between the prayers we whisper in darkness and the answers that arrive wearing work clothes and carrying flashlights and speaking with voices that sound remarkably like love made audible in a world that sometimes forgets how to listen. 6 months have passed since that storm-swept night when David Morrison's truck turned into my driveway, 6 months since I learned that God's postal service operates differently than I expected, that divine replies come through human hands and hearts and voices, that the most profound prayers often get answered by the most ordinary angels who don't even know they're wearing wings. The cancer is still with me, still marking time in my body like an unwelcome tenant counting down days on a lease I can't break, but it's no longer the only story being written in Dorothy Mae Patterson's life. There are other stories now, stories about community and connection, about neighbors who become family and strangers who become friends, about the way love multiplies when you stop hoarding it and start sharing it with anyone brave enough or desperate enough to knock on your door during life's inevitable storms. Dr. Martinez says the treatments are working better than expected, that maybe I have more time than anyone thought, more mornings to sit at this kitchen table writing letters to people who matter, more opportunities to be someone else's answer to prayer, more chances to participate in the divine comedy of ordinary miracles and everyday grace that surrounds us like air when we remember how to breathe deeply enough to notice. David still stops by every few weeks, his truck route becoming a lifeline that connects my small corner of Nebraska to the larger world of highways and destinations and people who are all fighting their own battles, all needing their own kinds of rescue, all deserving the kind of attention that says you matter, your story matters, your presence in this world makes a difference even when you can't see how or why or to whom. Today I'm writing letters again, but they're different letters now. Letters to children and grandchildren and friends both old and new, letters that carry news and love and hope instead of desperation, letters that connect rather than petition, letters that celebrate the miracle of being alive and aware and grateful for answers that come in forms we never expected but always needed. I've learned that God speaks fluent human, that divine love sounds like truck engines in storms and young voices asking if you're okay and neighbors bringing casseroles and pastors who visit for coffee instead of duty. I've learned that prayers don't always get answered the way we want them answered, but they always get heard, always matter, always contribute to the great conversation between heaven and earth that's been going on since the first human voice cried out in darkness and someone, somewhere, decided to bring light. Some of you listening to this story tonight are writing your own desperate letters, sitting at your own kitchen tables feeling forgotten and alone and wondering if anyone up there remembers your name or cares about your troubles. Let me tell you something about God's delivery service. He's never late, never forgets an address, never loses mail that matters. But his messengers don't always wear the uniforms you expect, don't always arrive when you think they should, don't always look like the help you thought you needed. Sometimes God's answer to your letter looks like a stranger with a kind heart and a willingness to stop when stopping is inconvenient, to help when helping is costly, to care when caring requires more than you thought you had to give. If Dorothy's story touched your heart tonight, if it reminded you that you're never truly alone even in your darkest moments, please leave a comment below sharing your own story of unexpected help or divine timing. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more of Grandma's stories, because she's taught me that every person has a story worth telling, every prayer has a purpose worth sharing, and every act of kindness creates ripples that reach farther than we ever imagine. Until next time, remember, God's postal service is always open, and his messengers are everywhere. You might even be someone else's answer to prayer today.